by day I sell a little insurance with Farm Bureau Financial Services. So you are here for zoning and planning design? If not? Okay. So let me introduce you to your panel today. Nick Kaufmann, he's the Vice President and Chairman of the Board for the WGM Group. It's a planning, survey, engineering, and design firm based in Missoula, Montana. Roger Millar, Director of Land Use and Transportation Policy for Smart Growth America. And Laval Means, Senior Planner for Missoula County Office of Planning and Grants. Or excuse me, Office of Planning and Grants. Anyway, I'll let them take it from here. Thank you.
Good morning. How is everyone? I'll stand up here for a second. I'm from Spokane, Washington, actually. I moved to Montana in about 1970, moved to the wonderful burg on the east side there, Billings, Montana. Lived there for 3 years. Started out in engineering and then switched from engineering to economics. In about 1972, the aerospace program cut back. And engineers were kind of a dime a dozen. I didn't want to spend my career mowing lawns at the local church, so I thought that economics would give me a broad-based background and I could grow from there. And it was a really good decision. And I want to share just some things about downtowns and change with you for a moment. So after I left Billings and arrived in Missoula, Montana, I actually bought into a downtown business. It was a gas station, gas. And so if you can close your eyes and remember the downtowns of that era where we had car dealers and gas stations and downtown grocery stores and hardware stores. And we actually had people that lived in the downtown. And so that's when I arrived in Missoula. And I look back and I drive by the place where that gas station was and I've seen it change from a number of things. It's been a travel agency, it's been a loan shop and a bunch of other things. And I think to myself, what's it going to be in 5 years or what's going to be in 10 years? And if you think about the place and you think about how things emerge and how things change, especially in our downtowns, it has to do with demographics, and it has to do with the economy, and it has to do with a whole number of things. And so we go downtown Missoula now and we see the work and effort on North Higgins Avenue changing the place from an auto-oriented and what used to be a retail and service center for the community as a city, as a vibrant city. And now it's a walkable place where we go and we have art galleries and we have boutique coffee shops and juice shops and we can buy wonderful pastries in our downtown. And so what they are now is an attractive place for the rest of the population to come, okay? What will they be in 5 years or what will they be in 10 years and how do we find out, right, what they may be? And then how do we plan, right, and put strategies in place to make sure that our downtowns will look like we want them to look and meet the demand that will change, just like it changed from 1970 to 2010. It'll change from 2010 to 2030. All right, and I think big changes. The focus of today's conversation deals with zoning and how zoning can help implement that change. Now, our zoning code up until last year was a 1935 zoning code, kind of no holds barred, no parking restrictions, do anything you want in the downtown. That's an okay model, right? And that model that allows anything to happen has allowed the marketplace to more or less dictate how our downtown looks and probably how your downtown looks, right? But if we want to imagine for a minute, right, what that downtown needs to look like to accommodate future demand and growth, and what kind of a place it needs to be, then zoning can be a tool to help us do that, and Laval and Roger will talk about that. When I was in Boise 2 years ago at a New West conference, I was walking around the campus and I was kind of dazzled because I still had this orange and blue from looking at the football field. And I walked by a building, and on that building it said, learn from the past, plan for the future, and imagine. Learn from the past, plan for the future, and imagine. So if we learn from the past about change, and we imagine the demographics that drive change, right? And we think about the economy that drives change and energy efficiency and the need to be closer to services and not have sort of regional things, regional outlying things, bringing people back into neighborhoods. Recently in Missoula, the Office of Planning and Grants in the city paid for a preference study. And we got to see among people who are going to move in the next 2 years where their preferences might be. And their preferences are to come back into existing neighborhoods. Now, whether they can afford that or not is a big question. But if we know that the preferences are to come back into existing neighborhoods, not exclusive of downtowns, okay, then what tools are available to us to bring those people, right, back into our downtowns in terms of place making? So by way of introduction, we have opportunities in front of us, okay? Realizing how demand is changing, right? Realizing what demographics are doing, because Jim and I are in the fastest growing age group in Montana, 55 and up. You are at least, you're right, you're all right, so what do we need? Do we need 1 acre tracts 3 miles from town? Do we need quarter acre tracts with 3 bathrooms and 4 bedrooms, right? What do we need, and where do we need it? And what kind of place are we going to choose? Because we will be able to choose, right? Will we choose downtowns, or will we choose a new neighborhood, right? Well, we will choose downtowns if downtowns are the places that we want them to be. So I'll let these two talk about zoning and growth policies and how we can do placemaking through regulatory tools. Thank you.
Okay, I guess we're doing a little brief introduction, and then we're just going to talk up here. We thought you'd be bored by an hour and a half of PowerPoint presentations. And my name's Roger Millar. I come to downtowns through about a 30-year career as an engineer and a planner. It's interesting that Nick and I share that engineering background and that we both kind of got out of that. I started my career in Portland, Oregon, and if you're tired of hearing Portland stories, I'm sorry, because a lot of my stuff is Portland. I got a great big glass of the Kool-Aid when I lived there. I moved to Portland in 1982. It had 20% unemployment, and Oregon had net out-migration. And most of downtown Portland was surface parking. The majority of the land use in downtown Portland in 1982 was surface parking. But they were starting to do some things different. And what I learned about zoning from Portland, I guess the sum of my 15 years of experience there, is that we've used zoning in the past to tell people, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the other thing. And the idea was to make it difficult to do the things that we didn't want people to do. And what I learned in Portland was that another way to look at zoning is to make it easy to do the things you want to see happen, rather than assembling a kind of Rube Goldberg device in your ordinances, lots of creative ways to say no. In fact, when I first got here, Mayor Engen told me that Missoula is a Native American term meaning no.
Explains why.
And as the director of OPG for a couple of years, I heard that a lot. But what we need to do with zoning ordinances, and what we're doing increasingly, is trying to figure out how to get to yes. I worked as a consultant for the city of Tempe, Arizona on their zoning ordinance. They were a community that was founded on the premise that we could turn cotton fields into subdivisions. And that's what Tempe did. And then Chandler grew to the south of them, and Mesa to the east, and Phoenix to the west and north. And Tempe found itself physically landlocked. It could not sprawl anymore. So they were dealing with how do they, convert from a community that's growing out to a community that's growing up. And while Missoula and Montana towns don't have that hard political edge that Tempe had, we have increasingly, when you talk about what people want, they want to see an edge. They want to see a difference between the city and the country, and they want to live in a place where they can get to country fast. So that was Tempe. I worked over in McCall, Idaho on their zoning ordinance, a lot of interesting things there. And then when I came to Missoula about 4 years ago, I was 6'5", I had blonde hair and blue eyes, and then I got into rewriting the Missoula zoning ordinance, and I aged rapidly. But we got through it, and now we're looking at doing some different things. So what we're going to talk about today, I think the three of us, are the trends and the demographics that are shaping community, how communities kind of grab a hold of that, turn that into vision, and then how you change your regulations to make your vision happen. So I'll sit down, let Laval introduce herself, and then we'll start the chat.
Hi everyone, I'm Laval Means, and I'm with the planning office. I've been there for about 13 years now, so I've kind of sustained myself. But I come at it from an architecture background. And my interest in architecture really was in placemaking, getting a sense of community and neighborhood and participation in architecture and design, and thinking that no matter what scale of built environment you're thinking of, whether it's a structure, a room in a structure, a street, or the entire community, that we really want to think of that interaction, a strong sense of identity, and the linkage between all of these different places. So it seemed like a natural flow for me to move from architecture into studying and looking at the larger streetscape and urban design. So I've been fortunate from me being in Missoula to have that task at hand while I've been at the planning office, both working on policy documents as well as these regulatory changes. I've looked at the policies in Missoula and quite familiar with them over those years at both the entire community scale as well as neighborhood scale. And you know that what we have here is an overall policy guidance document, and then more specific ones. And I know another session that might be today is to hear more about the downtown master plan. That's one example of how it's really important to establish a specific vision for what you want. We all have general ideas of what we'd like to see, but I hope part of this discussion kind of comes back to why it's important to move from general to specificity and help guide and provide some predictability for regulations and specific placemaking in certain areas of our community. So we also have our general regulations, and we've worked on updating those. We've done more to bring our code, our regulations, up to the 21st century. Hopefully what we see is more incentives for mixed use, for transit-oriented design, rather than tying in and relying on massive amounts of parking areas. But we also have some sort of frameworks for setting up overlays in certain areas that will promote pedestrian streetscapes and the relationship between buildings, building walls, our sidewalks, and our streets. So we have some new tools that we've got available through Title 20, and if that tool doesn't quite do it for a particular vision, there's also the idea of overlays that meet specific neighborhood plans, and that's something that I think the downtown area is talking about. So why is that a benefit to property owners, and why is that a benefit to the business to come back in and be specific and have that movement from our vision, our policy ideas, what the community wants to see as an identity, and bring it home to really how we want to see a building grow, or the streetscape grow in relationship to its neighbors, and focus in, because a lot of our regulations can be very general and wide open and do a lot of the things like meet the demands. But how do we do that and tie that to our vision for the community, and then our vision towards the downtown or any particular neighborhood? It might be by becoming more specific in certain areas. So those are some of the different tools we have, and I think that might be hopefully a part of this discussion. So thank you.
So if we start out with process, we all want, anybody here that doesn't want something to happen in the downtown? I mean, we're all here because we want our downtowns to be vibrant and we want something to happen, right? Okay. So, you know what luck is? Luck is when preparation meets with opportunity. That's luck, okay? So if we want to have luck and have our downtowns grow and prosper, then we need to prepare. And the way we prepare is we need to look at what's coming, right? We need to look at what's coming, and we need to prepare ourselves so that when it gets here, we're ready for it, all right? So preparation meets opportunity, things can happen. So the first part of that is what's going on in demographics? What's going on with the age of not just our infrastructure, but what's going on with the age of our structures in our downtowns? What's the potential for replacement of some of those older structures, and what's going to be needed there? And then the second part of that is how it will look, because our future, truthfully, ladies and gentlemen, is a future of competition. We have enjoyed a couple of decades where we could just put it out there, and we would build it and they would come. We're going to be competing in Missoula, Montana, just like other places, for trained professionals and for service people. We have to be able to provide a product in our downtowns that can compete with other areas, which means we need to be smart. We need to design our path of how we prepare for what's coming so our downtowns are ready. And I think Roger has some specific comments relative to Dr. Nelson and some of his projections.
Yeah. One of the things that I've found frustrating in my professional life and is getting the notion that things are changing across to folks who are quite comfortable doing what they do. I used to have a PowerPoint show where I had a picture of Ozzie and Harriet and Ricky, and I'd ask people who recognized the Nelsons, and a couple people would raise their hands, so I got that image out of my PowerPoint presentation. But the development community hasn't gotten that image out of its mind. We continue, I work for Smart Growth America, and what we're all about is giving people choice. Choice in where they live, where they work, where they play. And what you have in Missoula, by and large, is you have a choice in housing as long as what you're looking for is a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom, 2 or 3 bath place on a lot with a drive to everywhere you go. That's not choice. But it has worked financially for developers in the past. I do a project, I make money. Well, my next project I want to make money too. I made money on that last one. I think I'll do where my comfort zone is. But the changes that are coming, and it's really interesting when we started talking about the changes that are coming, we were accused of creating the change, and it's not. You need to have information, as Nick said, to get to luck. You need to have information to prepare. Information that you need to have. All of the growth, all of the net growth in population in the state of Montana in the next 25 years is going to be people aged 65 and older. We'll have roughly the same number of school-age kids, roughly the same number of young adults, roughly the same number of middle-aged folks. The age 65 and older quartile of our population is going to double in the next 25 years. So where is the opportunity if that change is coming? The opportunity is serving that market, and the opportunity is taking advantage of what gets left behind when folks move up into that market, out of single-family homes, for example. Another trend. 20 years ago, less than 10% of Montanans were morbidly obese. Today, it's approaching 25%. The way we design our community is affecting our health in a great way, and the health community is beginning to say that there is a connection between our built environment and our health, and we need to change that. So that's coming. People are looking for a healthier way to live. People are looking for green buildings. People are looking for opportunities to not have to drive to the health club to work out, but just walk to work and get their workout that way. Affordability is a huge issue. When I came to Missoula, I was told that we had an affordable housing crisis because our median home was $220,000. You go to San Francisco or Portland or Seattle or Denver, a $220,000 house would be an incredible bargain. But when you look at the disparity between wages and housing in Montana, that's a place we really need to catch up. But we need to understand that the growth in people coming here, you're still going to have most of the people here not being able to afford that single family home. The other thing you have to look at in terms of trend is families with children will be less than 25% of the households in Montana going forward. In 1960, it was roughly half of the households. Today in Missoula, it's 22% of the households. Better than 75% of the households in Missoula are couples without children or they're single people. And that's not because there are fewer children, it's because we're living longer. And as adults, we have a longer period of our lives when there aren't kids in the house. So we need to provide opportunities, getting back to luck, we need to prepare for the fact that most folks don't have kids in the house. So, we wind up being old, fat, broke, and alone, which is a really depressing place to be. That's the trend. So what do we do to change that trend? We need to prepare our communities for a lifestyle that allows people to age with grace, that keeps us healthy, that we can afford, and that keeps us a community. Because the idea of the family being out in their castle was great, but when most of us are alone, rattling around in that castle can get awfully darn lonely. And I think people are going to want community. That's going to be a real driver.
So we're looking at our built environment. It's how do we prepare for, maybe turn it into position ourselves right, meeting those demands. How do we prepare for that in our built environment? And that has to do with some guidance somewhat through our policies and our regulations, and being flexible, but how much flexibility should there be? It's about choices, and it's about combining that with bringing it down to that place making and combining it with our sense of our identity and our community. So when we talk about the aging population, what does that mean to our built environment? It might mean that person might want to be closer to all of their services, so we have to start thinking about mixing our uses more. Maybe it means that the aging population, or that person might need to be living longer but not being able to drive. So connections to other modes of transportation, the trails, sidewalk systems, but also transit. And it trickles down into our regulations, because what we want to do and hope to do, and I think we did do in our Title 20, is have some incentives for the mixed-use development, and have some incentives for, like I said earlier, if you are developing a project that is a commercial project close to transit, you can reduce your parking. So there's little ways that we can do that through, all the way through to our regulations.
So let's go back to learn from the past, plan for the future, and imagine. So if we know that they're leaving the suburbs and moving closer and closer to town, here's some empirical evidence. In Missoula, Montana, the price of smaller lots that are 40 feet wide by 110 feet deep, have increased in value, while lots larger than 10,000 square feet have decreased in value. Okay? The Parade of Homes, which starts tomorrow, if you stay in Missoula, there's a couple of great homes you might want to go look at. But all the homes in the Parade of Homes this year are all closer in. There's restorations as we move closer into the communities. Remember that preference study I told you about? Why are we restoring and pouring money into homes in existing neighborhoods? Every home in the Parade of Homes emphasizes energy efficiency, the lower cost of operation, the lower cost of maintenance of homes, and now they're starting to talk about the place or the setting. Now we bring that to downtowns. The regulatory function, that just sounds boring, doesn't it? Zoning code. Everybody say zoning code. Exciting. You guys said that with great enthusiasm. I want you to understand that regulations are part of design, and you design regulations to get a desired outcome, okay? In 1973, the state legislature said, hey, wait a second. If you're going to put an individual drain field and a well on one lot, it's going to be an acre in size, right? They did that so we wouldn't get more than one drain field per acre. But we surrounded our urban areas with 1 acre tracts. Roger talked about Tempe and its inability to grow. In Montana, we didn't have the suburbs and the growth of Arizona, but we created a land use pattern. It made it very difficult for our cities to logically grow. As they needed to grow, they had to leapfrog out past these 1 acre tracts. We're smarter than that now, okay? Now we have a tool, and it's called our growth policy and our zoning, that allows us to not only allow for land uses. So the first part of the design is what kind of land uses do we want in our downtowns, okay? So the first part of the zoning code we design is what type of land uses, okay? How do we want people to get to our downtowns? Do we want them to drive, walk, bike? Do we want them to do all those things, right? And how do we deal with the accessory parts of uses, like parking? How do we deal with the ability to advertise in terms of signs? Okay? All of those things can be designed into a land use regulation. What's innovative in land use regulations today that we didn't have in 1935, right, are form-based zoning. Zoning that says, look, this is a great land use, and here's how your parking works, and here's how your signage work, but you know what? We're really concerned about the form also, because place is important. Place is important. Everybody close your eyes. Just go ahead and close them. A couple of you got them closed already, all right? Now imagine that you've left your hometown, and you've been gone for a week, and Disney World was wonderful, and Yosemite was beautiful, and Glacier Park was great, but imagine your town. Imagine what you see as you think back to what you're missing and where you want to go back to, okay? All right? The place is likely in your image. The landforms that surround where you live. If there's a river, if there's foothills, if there's mountains, if there's wheat fields, the place is what's important. So as we design our downtowns, allowing the natural forms to emerge so there's a sense of place as we do placemaking is critical, right? So now we'll talk a little bit about how we can design regulations, the fun part of land use planning, how we design regulations to help us make places so we're competitive. If the first row of tables is a downtown, and the second is a downtown, and the third is a downtown, and I want to live downtown, how do I pick which downtown I'm going to go to? I'm going to pick the downtown that meets my imagination, that meets my needs. Okay?
And we need to take, back to that demographic stuff that we were talking about, we need to do some thinking about how do we sort that out on our landscape? How do we bring that into town? And then how do we regulate to make it happen? One of the things that we did here in Missoula is the demographers told us there are 15,000 households coming to Missoula in the next 20 years. Now, what we could have done is waited until the building permits came in and seen where they showed up. What we did instead is we looked at the demographic trends that I talked about earlier, and we said, where should those 15,000 households go on the landscape, and why should they go there? And what we decided as a community was that approximately 20% of those new households were going to be in the downtown. And the reason they were going to be in the downtown, again, older folks, singles, affordability, healthy lifestyle, it made sense. Then we did the preference work, and one of the things we found out in the preference work is that this community is about 50-50 own rent. Most communities it's 60-40 or higher, but because of the university, I think primarily, we're about a 50-50 community. And when we looked at ownership and we looked at single-family homes and multifamily homes, a large part of our community is very comfortable with multifamily housing. A very small part of our community is comfortable with owning multifamily housing. And part of that, I think, is just, we've been taught since we were kids that it's important to be near schools, for example. When you're buying a house, school is important in buying a house. Even though 3/4 of us don't have kids, schools are important. We're also told, and it just becomes, it's part of the American myth, the American legend, that condos are a pain in the butt. And today, it's true. Try getting financing for a condominium. The same property in fee simple ownership, relatively easy to get financing for. Condominiums, very difficult. So one of the things that I'm working at on a national level is, the administration, the national administration is talking about mixed use downtowns, all the rest of that. At the same time, the FHA is making it down near impossible to finance that stuff. So maybe they all need to be talking to one another. But 20% of the housing coming to Missoula, 20% of the new housing downtown, condominiums don't work. Half of our community is willing to live, happy to live in multifamily housing, but about 10%, charitably 10%, is interested in buying a multifamily unit. So that's 1,500 over 20 years, 1,500 units, if 10% are willing to buy, 20% coming downtown, so, 300 condos. That's 15 a year. That's not a whole lot of absorption. Maybe we have more than 20%, maybe more of them are condos. So we're looking at somewhere between 300 and 1,000 condominiums downtown, which means if we're going to absorb 3,000 homes downtown, we're looking at 2,000, 2,500 apartments. Where do they go? Why do they go there? That's the stuff that took the demographic kind of, here's what's coming, and then the vision with the downtown master plan. We identified places for that stuff to go. And what we need to do now is figure out how to make it easy to go there and how to make those attractive spaces. And that's the next step that our downtown community is working on, which is taking our Title 20, which is now a modern ordinance, but it's a modern Euclidean ordinance. There's different kinds of zoning out there. There's Euclidean zoning, which is what we have used primarily in the United States since the 1930s. Euclidean zoning is a product of the Hoover administration. You know what else
You do go back.
Yeah, I do, almost as far back as Nick. I didn't get to vote for Hoover, but, but look at the other things the Hoover administration brought us, the Great Depression. So, Euclidean zoning was all about separating uses, keeping the housing for the workers away from the chemical plant that was making them sick. That was the intent. The unintended consequence of that is that we as a nation have separated where we live from where we work, from where we play. And with that separation, the scales changed. And we started creating great big places to live and just live, subdivisions, great big places to work and just work, suburban office parks, and great big places to shop and play, malls, power centers, the like. Downtowns are all about a different scale. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that coming together to create a great place. Zoning doesn't support that. Zoning just naturally, Euclidean zoning naturally doesn't support that. So we're looking at other forms. And what we're talking about in zoning today, modern zoning today in downtowns, is a very fine-grained level of detail and not worrying as much about what you're using the building for as what it looks like. Because the building's going to be around for a long time and the uses are likely to change. In Portland, the hot housing market was all originally designed as warehouse. It was designed as industrial warehouse for storage and distribution of goods. Now it's housing, same building. So maybe we don't spend as much time worrying about what the building's being used for as what the building looks like. And that's a trend that's moving forward.
So some of the details that they're talking about in the implementing the downtown plan has to do with building to the edge of the street or having enough transparency glass down along the street level, so that as people walk by, they feel like they've got a connection with what's going on outside and going on inside. Having enough of, again, the residential occurring within the district, and maybe even building up a little bit more than we do right now. So those are some of the different aspects that they're looking at. I think they're also looking at at trying to focus some uses. So while Euclidean is the overall picture, we have this one zone in downtown that's called the Central Business District, and it allows everything. Actually, we have commercial districts around the city that are what we call hierarchical.
Nice.
They go from commercial or the more intense to also allowing residential in them. And the problem we have is if that becomes the cheapest land to build on, then residential is going to start occurring in places that we really aren't looking at developing neighborhoods or planning for the pedestrian connections that go along with it. So with Title 20, we were trying to actually kind of focus that a bit more and say, you know, think about the places that you're making within all these different areas, either along a streetscape or within the downtown itself. And then actually even discourage some of the uses. So what we found, I think, with the work on the downtown plan was there might be some places where you really want to encourage retail, but should every corridor and every side street also be all retail, or should there be more residential coming in? Or should some edges around it be allowing the commercial? Or where should the office rather, should the office be up on the second level? So that sort of delicate mix is one of the things that was part of the planning, the vision, and then implementation is something through maybe what we call an overlay. It's something that could sit over top of the base zoning and provide the detail, that delicate detail that takes that identity and turns it into something that's vibrant, that doesn't just have an everything and anything goes, but really is feeding towards a message that plan was speaking to.
So, anybody here ever procrastinate? Nobody's ever procrastinated, right? So why do we procrastinate? We procrastinate if we don't know how to do something, or we procrastinate if we don't want to do something, right? So where do we start? Where do we start when we talk about downtowns and imagining what downtowns can be and what they need to be? The first place we start is to remember that they're in a setting, they're in a place, right? And then we need to remember that they're part of a community. They're not just a downtown, they're part of a community, right? And so public and private partnerships are important, and they're especially important today because we need to share our resources. So the first thing you do in any type of design is to figure out what you have. Step one, what do we have, right? What does our population look like? What are the trends coming for our population, right? And what do people prefer? Team up with your realtors, team up with your building association in your community, team up with your Chamber of Commerce, right? And get the base work done that will give you a picture of what your community looks like. The demographics, the trends, the demand. I gave you an example of what's happening with the prices of homes or lots in Missoula. I give you ideas of what's happening in terms of what builders are doing. You know what we like? We like what's comfortable, don't we? And we don't like what's not comfortable. And so what we have to do is we have to train ourselves a little bit here, have a little bit of discipline up front to do the basic groundwork, to see what our current situation is and where we're going, right? Once we've got that, then we can take that knowledge and say, this is where our downtown is heading. And this is where demand is going to be for the downtown. And then we can look around, and you can peek over on the table behind you or lean forward and peek at the table in front of you and see what other successful downtowns have done, right? But you have to successfully train yourself to imagine and have the tenacity to hold on to that dream that you imagine in the face of great pressure. Today's economy, I'll take some of Roger's fire here. I'll be private sector and Roger will be public, but in today's economy, if I've got a use for a corner and it doesn't match the vision, right? And you and I have to confront each other because I need to fill up a building, I need to rent it, but you want it with a certain type of use, you have to have the ability to communicate the vision. You have to have the ability and strength of character, right, to make sure that what you want to see there is implemented, because in the short run, what's immediately in front of you can have devastating effects in the long run for what the vision is. And what we want you to be doing is thinking about the long run. Your integration as downtowns into community, right? Your ability to assess your current situation and the trends. And then to imagine what the place would look like. Then and only then do you get to sit down with a piece of paper or a professional and share that vision, right? And help them codify your vision. Now, you're on your way to having a comparative advantage in a new paradigm. There, I used all the old words, I think.
God, every buzzword.
Yeah.
It's well done. What we're talking about is a creative tension between people who have competing interests. Building owners and building leasers have competing interests. A building owner wants to maximize revenue and reduce cost. Somebody who leases a space for business wants to maximize revenue and reduce cost. They get into conflict. If I'm locating a business, I'm looking for certainty. I want to know what's going to be around me. When I was in Portland, there's this commercial street, 23rd, it's a retail street. It's a wonderful retail street. And the wonderful shops would just draw you down the street. You'd see storefront displays, great stuff happening. And then you come to Legacy Good Samaritan Hospital, 2 blocks of blank brick wall. The retail space on that 3rd block was completely isolated and horribly cut off from all of this exciting retail activity. And it took us 20 years and a whole bunch of dough to figure out a way to bridge that 2-block gap in the retail space to make the rest of 23rd successful. We built the Portland streetcar, and we put the stops for the Portland streetcar on the far side of Good Sam. So people coming from downtown had to make that walk. And so all of a sudden, the part of 23rd further down started to work. That hospital just happened over history, but if you have, like Laval said in Missoula, a CBD zone that says anything goes. I used to have developers come in and say, your zoning is making it hard for me to develop downtown because of your damn parking requirements. You go to the CBD, there is no parking requirement in the CBD zone. None. There is no limitation on what you can use the space for. None. But am I going to invest in a block in retail if I don't know that the block next to me, the block that connects me to the other retail, what it's going to be in the future? Is it going to be office? Is it going to be a killer in terms of people coming to my space? So the zoning, this fine-grained zoning, is a debate and a arrival at a compromise between competing interests. We did our downtown master plan. The vision for the downtown master plan was a retail hot spot, an area between the old Macy's and Orange Street along Main and Front was going to be a retail hotspot. The zoning implication of that would be that would be retail only in terms of zoning. What if you own an office building along that corridor? Or what if you own a building today that the economy's shaky and your retail tenants moved out, and this zoning would require you to lease to a retail tenant in the future, and you wouldn't have the ability to lease to an office tenant or somebody else. Now, it's probably in your long-term interest to have retail there because that's going to make the retail around you stronger, which is going to make the retail in your building stronger, which is going to allow you to charge more rent, which is, on and on and on and on. That's the long-term vision, but today I've got a hole in my portfolio. I'm still paying on the building, but I don't have any income coming in. So do I lease to, a broker? Do I lease to do I lease to some office thing? That's the concern that you have to think about as you go through zoning. When you look at the area between Front and Main, there's a wonderful building between Ryman and Woody, office building, right in the middle of our retail hotspot that is, it serves a function. The people that own it, I'm sure, are proud of it. But it looks like it belongs in a suburban office park. It doesn't look like it belongs in a downtown setting. Your ordinances, your zoning should make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, and should make sure that over time that area becomes, in terms of that fine-grained walkable space, it's a dead zone. It's a dead zone. So how do you make that not happen in your community? And how do you make sure that the property owner's interest is respected and enhanced through your zoning, that the lessor's interest, the business owner's interest is expanded and enhanced, and that the people that live downtown, we talk about 8-hour-a-day downtowns like Houston, Texas, empty from 5 at night till 8 in the morning, or an 18-hour-a-day downtown like Missoula's, until the bars close, and then a 24-hour day. But going from a 16 or 18-hour day downtown to a 24-hour day downtown, if I'm going to live downtown, am I going to want to live next to a bar? Am I going to want to live over a restaurant? I am sharing some space with some folks in the downtown, and I was walking by the old Atlantic Hotel, which is a great old historic building. And there's this funky old housing in the back of the building, and I would love to live in a loft downtown. I would love to see somebody convert a building like that to something really attractive. And then I saw the vent stacks for the Iron Horse right up on the second and third floor, all hours of the day and night. Are you going to open your window if you're living? So when you convert from an 18-hour day to downtown to a 24-hour day downtown, you have these competing interests. And what you need to do is you need to go at a fine-grained scale, block by block through your downtown to design the form that's going to work for you, and honestly understand and address all of those issues, because if you don't, you're not going to have success. But other than that, it's a piece of cake.
Well, I like the term debate. I think that was a great image, again, and reference for next steps here, because when you're talking about fine grain, we're talking about rezoning some areas. It's the idea of whether it's an overlay or any way that you regulate on top of your vision. And in order to do that, you have to have a majority of the property owner support. You have to have the majority of the governing body's support. So you do a lot of the heavy lifting up front. You have the discussions about the interests of the leasee, of the property owner, of the neighbor, of the relationships between property owners and the community's interest that comes into play. Is this fitting our identity for a small area and a bigger area of that community? You have all those discussions up front, and you come to something that you feel like you can all agree on. That then, whatever ends up becoming approved by the governing bodies is something that's predictable, and going back to the property owner, they're able to now, sell something that has a vision that's saying, I'm going to be different, this downtown compared to that downtown, compared to the other downtown, and marketable. And you end up with being able to come in and have that focus right there and turn over a project that's been vetted already. It might mean easier building permits in the future. The debate has been had already. And I think that that's a real advantage when you're looking at fine-grained development tools like overlays, form-based codes, etc.
So, the ability to look at something and perceive what you're seeing. I'm going to give you 2 examples. How many people have been to Billings? When I go back to Billings, it's like I'm going home. I lived there for 3 years. It's wonderful rim rocks and the Yellowstone River, and it's just a great place. Wonderful downtown. But in Missoula, Montana, I've got Mount Sentinel with the trail that goes up to the M. I got Mount Jumbo with the trail that goes up to the L. I've got a wilderness area 4 miles up the Rattlesnake. I've got the Old Milwaukee Railroad right-of-way, which is a trail system through downtown along the river. Picked up the newspaper the other day, and I learned that Billings is Montana's trailhead. Billings is Montana's trailhead, right? What's Missoula? It's the Garden City. Did you see a garden while you were here? Have you seen one yet? So, knowing what you have and accenting what you have and advertising what you have, but being able to continue to see what you have with the built environment are all really important things. You all been on Higgins Avenue, downtown Missoula, right? So if you go to Higgins Avenue, right over here, and you head south, you'll come to the Clark Fork River. It's a bridge. The bridge allows 2 things to happen. It allows to have a gateway on the south side of the bridge with the old Milwaukee station, right, and the Boone and Crockett Club. and the beautiful Missoulian building, which used to be a car lot, right? Those are the anchors of the gateways on the south side of the Higgins Avenue Bridge. So now move to the south side of the Higgins Avenue Bridge by Scotty's Table in Missoula and look back north, right? The anchor on the west side, the northwest side of the bridge, is the wonderful Wilma Theater, right? And part of our river park and the tent. What's on the other side? What's on the northeast corner of the Higgins Avenue Bridge? A parking lot. A parking lot. What's also on the northeast corner of the Higgins Avenue Bridge are two of our newest downtown buildings. First Interstate Bank's brand new bank building and the Millennium Building, which sits back behind the parking lot. Now, if you go out on North Reserve Street, what do you see up next to Reserve Street? You see a parking lot, and behind it, you see the building, right? Okay? Typically in downtowns, we don't see a pattern of a parking lot in front and the building behind, especially with the opportunity for a bridge gateway, right? Why is it in downtown Missoula, we have on our gateway, coming from the south into our downtown, a parking lot, then a wonderful brand new building with a building behind it, right? There were forces at work. The people that helped build the parking lot for demand downtown were First Interstate Bank. The people that built the Millennium Building, right? The bank wanted to be the cornerstone. Everybody participated and worked together. But with understanding of urban pattern, with the understanding of integration of natural sources and sense of place, that conversation, before those two buildings were planned and that parking lot was built, a different conversation to rearrange those buildings or bring one forward and put the parking in a different location than on Higgins Avenue, right? So the retail can continue across the bridge. It's a nice looking parking lot, okay, as you look down on it. But that whole urban form could have changed. But you don't know that it can change, right, unless you can see that change. And I would bet that 75% of the people in this room would walk along Higgins Avenue from one side of the river to the other and never see the change. But it makes a difference. And it goes back to what I talked about when we first started this conversation, okay? As things change in your downtown, every time something changes, it allows for a new opportunity, right? You're going to have planned and prepared so that opportunity affects the whole downtown and benefits the whole community, or you will not have prepared, right? And what happens, that opportunity that happens then will affect the investors in that particular piece of property, right? So every piece of property is part of a place downtown. Downtown is part of a community, and that community sits in a place. They all need to complement each other, but you need to be able to see. When you look, you need to be able to perceive what's actually happening. So, with a different type of zoning code, right, what we saw there, and again, First Interstate is an incredible community member and part of the state of Montana. The folks that own the Millennium Building are wonderful citizens, and that parking lot serves a great function as an anchor for our downtown river park. I would just take those dominoes and change them, right? But I can't now. And I won't, because those buildings will be there for another 150 years, right? But having prepared and having understood, right, and having the appropriate zoning in place for your vision, right, means that you don't have to look back and say, how could I change those dominoes?
Yeah, it's interesting. I used to live over in the slant streets and work downtown, and I walked the Higgins Bridge every day. And every day I walked on the west side. And the reason I walked on the west side is because there was stuff to see. You'd walk by the Hobnob, you'd walk by the restaurants when Scotty's Table was there, you'd walk by the Peace Center, you'd walk by that stuff, and you cross over and you walk by the Wilma. There was always something going on. The other side of the bridge, you had Fortress Missoulian, like they're waiting for the hordes are going to attack the building. It's an architectural style that is not a downtown architectural style. And you get to the other side and you've got the parking lot and now you've got the great bank building, but there wasn't a whole lot of activity on that side of the street. Form-based coding, or coding that leads to successful downtowns, isn't about just the building. You know, we can drop buildings in. The code that we have today, you can drop a building in from outer space. You can drop a building in from Scottsdale. You can drop a building in from Seattle. You can drop a building in from Atlanta. And our code would allow that building, which would not fit our community. Form-based code is about the space. It's also about how that space relates to the public realm and the spaces next to it. And that's the stuff that you need to do to use code, use zoning as a tool to make your downtown more successful. It's tough. It's the debate, the negotiation is going to be tough. But it's about your building, and it's about how your building relates to its neighbors and makes your neighbors stronger, which in turn make you stronger, and so on, and create a community that you can be proud of.
And it's that timing too, to get it right
We're almost ready for Q&A.
and build from a vision towards those regulations. And the example that you gave is a great one for maybe not have had that dialogue yet, so it could do what it was doing within the code we had, wide open.
Yep. Are we ready for questions? Yep.
Perfect timing.
Perfect. Now we have a question right up front here.
Well, I was wondering
First.
about all the one-way streets. I'm not sure how many there are in Missoula, but it seems to me they kind of defeat the purpose of the downtown. What's the deal on the one-way streets?
We're getting rid of them. The downtown master plan that we adopted last year calls for, we have Main and Front are our two one-way, it's our one-way couplet. We're going to get rid of it as soon as we can get the money together to change the signals around on Orange and on Higgins and elsewhere. It's, the project, I think, is a little over $1 million. Piece of cake. You know, no, we'll find the money and we'll make that change, but it's on the list. One-way couplets, I mean, old vestiges of old ideas that they move traffic, but what people forgot, they were trying to move traffic to a destination. Downtown is the destination, and so we're changing that mindset and changing those roads.
Can I do, just to follow up on that, you guys just did a master plan in downtown Billings. What are you doing with the one-way streets in Billings? You gonna keep them, do you know?
Working on turning them into a couple
Right,
of
we're trying really hard to get rid of them.
Okay.
In our case, it's really
You got a bunch of them, yeah.
a bunch. It's all grid up.
Yeah, it is, no, yeah.
It's very expensive. We are going to lose a couple of them very soon, but the rest of them, we're hopeful we're going to be losing many more. We're going to go off just for cost reasons.
Thank you.
It's always risky talking about the host city, so.
Go right ahead.
You know, I broke the ice for you, yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
You did, I'm gonna go there. And thanks, and I think it's a great presentation. Nick brought up the First Interstate project, which is obviously one of the new kids to arrive downtown. It's great to see that kind of investment. But Roger also talked about the hospital in Portland and how you have blank walls. And I think you touched on the fine-tooth comb a little bit. But to me, that when I see the design guidelines, the thing I always look for consistently in every set of design guidelines is transparency on the first floor. That's what it's really all about, is getting theater going on the ground floor plane. And how much of that area is transparent and to what degree is it transparent. So those are details I think that just make a world of difference in, you know, how exciting downtown is a place to explore. And then secondly is sort of that protection zone overhead from the heat, the rain, the wind. And I look at the First Interstate building and I say 90% of the way there, we got a little bit more to go in terms of maybe creating a little bit better transparency. I realize the bank use, there's some security matters there, but banks are retailers these days. And having better transparency to market the wares and their services, to me seems like something they can maybe look at doing probably in the future. I was curious to know though, the parking, you hit on that as well, that ramp, did they ever consider doing a minor building around that anyway, or making the parking garage a bigger structure and putting uses on the first floor? Was that ever in the works, or that didn't pencil out for whatever reasons? Or?
I think, and again, this is, like, you know, I'm trying to set an example for courage here, because most people probably wouldn't bring up that example, but it's a good example that helps you see something or perceive something that you just wouldn't see when you look at it. But, you know, the view from Higgins Avenue to the Millennium Building is very, very important. It's critical. And while the surface of that parking structure, because it's a two-story structure, allows that visual, it'd be interesting how you could do retail and not put the Millennium Building behind something. And they didn't want to be behind something, right? So the symbiotic relationship there is the parking and the two new buildings, right? The relationship and how they're located is the question. So I don't know if you could keep the view of the Millennium Building that's critical to them and do what you're suggesting, but it should be worth looking at.
Maybe slightly went higher with the parking deck and then put a liner building along the edge of the bridge. I look at the other side of the street where you've got the theater and that railing that's along there. I don't know if anyone's ever talked about putting restaurants or cafe spaces on there, but looking down into the park. That to me is just a great edge.
It is.
And if I can sort of see and experience that on the other side of the bridge instead of, I still feel like a little bit of the former fort bunker mentality when I come down a little bit. It's not as quite as welcoming to me as the other side, but the theater is. I've got that activity level happening on the other side.
Yeah, what's really interesting to see is how over time the stores that are on front, the restaurants, are starting to relate to the park more. You know, Scotty's Table, that's opening up, the Mackenzie River Pizza's opening up, and you're using the back of those buildings and looking out at Karas Park and having it be active. One of the things the downtown plan calls for is expanding the park and moving the parking that's there somewhere else on the west side of the bridge. It'd be great to, if we'd had the foresight to clad that bridge deck, or, the ramp that's there on the east side with some retail, but then you get the other necessary but not too attractive land use, which is the big substation. Between the parking garage and here is an enormous substation. Yeah, and that, it kind of is a barrier.
And at one time, there was discussion about, that second deck over Bank Street, extending over a riverfront lot. And through the master plan, we've gotten away from that idea and gotten into an idea of a structured parking block to the east with retail on the main floor.
Yeah. Right there by the trailhead, the Holly and Park, it's structured parking there, but taking that corner of Patty and front and having that be retail with the parking behind it.
We always thought on this building too, they have a beautiful patio, out here on the river, but you can't see the river from the patio. If you did a second or third story patio, you'd have this amazing view of the entire waterfront on this building.
Well, remember, San Antonio started in 1938 or something like that, so keep at it. The river will be a really great spine of development for you in the future. What you're doing is outstanding.
Questions? Sure.
Well, I just want to talk about, we just passed an ordinance here in Missoula for historic preservation for design guidelines in our neighborhoods and our downtown. And it was after the first interstate building was built. And all I'm going to say is it's a great building and that's fine. But if you go to Bozeman, who has had design guidelines for 20 years, and the first interstate building there, talk about a difference. It's transparent. It's got entrances, it's got awnings, it ties in with the rest of it. So it's just a matter of things you can do to help tie that all together. And I think design guidelines are a good way to go. And I'll talk a little bit later in my session about that. But it's really important. And it's the same architectural firm. They did both buildings. And the difference is just because of those design guidelines.
Well, I have one caution for you as a takeoff on that. You can make a copy of something, or you can get an electronic copy of something, and you can change the title and change this and put your name on the bottom, and you just wrote a letter. That's a great help, as long as you make sure you change all the appropriate words in the letter. You can get someone else's zoning code, and you can say, this is great, let's just adopt it. We'll just change it from XYZ to Missoula. That's a wonderful example of how building form takes place with regard to zoning. But zoning has to be as individual as you are people, okay? It has to reflect your vision, not someone else's vision. This is a design process. It's regulations that allow for form to implement your image and your vision. Okay? What's wonderful about looking across the fence in someone else's yard is to give you ideas. How you apply those ideas in your yard is individual.
I just had a quick question. I've just recently relocated from Arizona to Montana, and I was a part of a redevelopment plan in Glendale, Arizona. And one of our big conversations was about sense of place and using public art, green space, landscaping, streetscape. So I'm now in Great Falls and a part of the downtown master plan process there. So I was just wondering, from your conversation here in Missoula, creating that sense of place, did those discussions come up?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. They were front and center. The wonderful thing about our downtown master plan process was that it was a public-private partnership. It was led by the private sector. It was, I was the director of OPG at the time, but it was not a city project. It was a project of the Business Improvement District, the Downtown Association, the Parking Commission, and the Redevelopment Agency. And we sat on the side as advisors and members of the steering committee, but it wasn't our planning process. But the streetscape was a part of it, parks were a part of it, and we spent our time visioning both the public space and the private space and how they work together. So there's a component of it that deals with retail, and there's a component of it that deals with parks, and there's a component of it that deals with transportation, and it all kind of blends together. What's really important about planning, I've learned over the years that it's not the plan, it's the planning. Planning is all about creating momentum. And if the goal is a document, there are lots of wonderful documents gathering dust all over the country. It's creating momentum for change in your community is what planning is about. Regulation is the long-term thing. To bring our plan to fruition, we need to take the momentum we generated and change the regulation. Because whoever it was that sat in Herbert Hoover's Department of Commerce and wrote the model zoning ordinance that got adopted all around the country, we're still living with it.
That is long-term.
We're still living with it. And, what we need to do in our community, what you need to do in your community is create the vision and then change your regulation to implement the vision, and it'll be there long after everybody forgets all the fun meetings you had putting the plan together. So that's, I guess, the importance of the regulation is the long-term perspective.
We have time for one more.
Just real quick, and I realize there's probably nobody here from Helena, but listening to you talk about developing an individual plan that will fit your community, I'm intrigued a little bit by Helena because they've closed off 3 or 4 blocks of Main Street, made it into a walking mall. They have the Great Northern Development. They have Last Chance Gulch. I don't know. Do they have a master plan, or are they just springing up different plans all over?
It's a good question. I honestly don't know. And, pedestrian malls are a sign of a time that's passed. There are some that are quite successful around the country, others that aren't so successful. We debated that really, really briefly here. Said, nah, not right for us. What we were looking to do was connect places that weren't connected today. So some of the visionary kind of long-term stuff we have, a big barrier in our community is the Montana Rail Link main line, which is absolutely vital to Montana's economy, absolutely vital to Missoula's economy, but it creates a gap in our landscape. It's the north end of downtown. And what we looked at in the master plan was getting actually under the tracks at the station up at the X's and creating a large pedestrian plaza there and a pedestrian connection over to the north side, because there is surplus land over there. And Montana Rail Link and Burlington Northern absolutely need it for their rail operations right up to the moment they decide to develop it. And what we'd like to do is have that connected to downtown and not developed as again, something that landed from outer space. So not knowing what happened in Helena, our big thing was connecting people and understanding that one way you connect people is with cars, and another way is with the pedestrian scapes that you put together.
Yeah, when we first began talking about this, you remember form follows function, right? So how do you want it to function? Why would you close the street and make a pedestrian mall? To bring more people there, to make a space to bring more people there. Billings did that way back. I remember when I think Billings closed off the street and they took it out, and in Eugene, Oregon, a town that led the country in terms of innovation, had those, and they took them out. The reason you put them in is the same reason you take them out, right? Is as the population changes, what you're trying to do is get people into the downtown. You're trying to do placemaking, and you're trying to make it vital. Goes back to the discipline of design that we talked about at the very beginning. Again, I wish I had a magic potion that was zoning regulation. I could take my wand and sprinkle it on you. I can't. What the three of us can do is explain to you the appropriate process, right, to get to a regulatory tool that lets you implement the vision for your downtown.